Do you need to know more information about the cost of house construction to help you decide whether to renovate or sell? Did you know that you can get independent cost advice from a quantity surveyor? Welcome to the Renovation Collaborative On the Tools podcast, where I interview industry experts to find out practical information to help you renovate smarter. My name is Stephanie Skyring. I'm an Australian architect with 20 plus years of experience helping people create better, more environmental homes on any budget. In the previous episode, I spoke to a building cost estimator. In today's episode, you'll find out how a quantity surveyor can also provide you with independent building cost advice. You'll get further insights into building costing, which will add value to your renovation project, whether you're an owner, a builder, an architect, or a building designer. I'll be talking to highly respected quantity surveyor Flavio Costanzo from Flavio Costanzo & Associates, Quantity Surveyors and Building Cost Consultants. Good morning, Flav, and thank you so much for joining me on the Renovation Collaborative On the Tools podcast.
My pleasure, Steph.
So my first question today, understanding that we spoke to a cost estimator last week, the other specialist who can provide independent cost advice. Can you tell me what a quantity surveyor or QS, what their background is to help us understand the difference?
Well, the background's changed significantly. When I started my course at QIT, it was a 6-year course part-time. The main thrust of quantity surveyors then was doing bills of quantities, a detailed takeoff that you then put it out to tender, and every builder prices on the scope that's in that bill of quantities. They don't have to reflect on the drawings other than to gauge the complexity and the access issues and those sort of things.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Sometimes the cost can be difficult to be reflected by the basic quantities.
Yes.
Because one of the big issues is when an architect selects an expensive product, what's the waste? How much am I going to waste of this product in the design that the architect has selected for something? And that's what builders get frustrated mostly about. I mean, if you've got a 30% wastage factor on an expensive product.
Because the sheet material, hypothetically, versus a board.
Exactly.
Yes.
Sheets come in sizes, and the architect picks a certain size of the way he wants to define it on the project.
Yes.
And the waste factor can be an absolute killer. So doing a bill of quantities is fine for commercial buildings. Most of the estimators in there are pretty well look at the drawing, make a gut feeling reaction as to what the wastage factor could be, and that's what they tender on. And everybody prices the same quantities.
Because it's been given to them as the quantities. Wow.
That's it.
And is that the same now in commercial construction?
No, it's changed significantly. I mean, I've also done jobs in Sydney and Melbourne, and because we were running the job from Brisbane, I did a bill of quantities to give me the level of comfort. So when I go on site to do a progress claim, I had some control as to what was being done. So we prepared the bill at significant expense, and the builder just refused to price it. He priced it on a lump sum off the drawings. He didn't look at the bill at all. The bills have they've gone into history. Right. They don't exist. I still produce them now occasionally. I've done a job not so long ago for a job in South Brisbane. But builders, the modern cost estimating office doesn't know what to do with the bill of quantities. They want to engage their subcontractors to price their scope from the drawing.
Yes, they want to make their own assessments.
They don't want to commit themselves to a rate for a variation, which is what the function of a bill of quantities is. If the scope changes of a quantity, you've got a rate. Builders hate giving you a rate. They want to start from scratch every time and get a price from their subcontractor. So the subcontractor's happy. He's made his assessment. He's had a good run on the job. He doesn't need to add extra profit on the job to cover what he may have underestimated initially. But if you have a rate, it's locked down in concrete, and then that's where the problems start. So
we were talking then about commercial costings and estimates. So really is that predominantly the background of a quantity surveyor is more in the commercial sector? That's
where we predominantly used to flourish. Because of the bill of quantities issue, preparing bills of quantities for the industry to price to enable a client to have a more accurate assessment of what his final cost is going to be, without variations, of course. But that's predominantly where it came from, yes.
Yeah. And so now quantity surveyors, typical quantity surveying firms still work predominantly, and you're trained predominantly for the commercial sector, is that right, more so? I mean, obviously you'll be trained for residential as well, because that's just a very small area, but there's just so much different diversity of work, isn't there, for QSs?
It would be predominantly commercial. You don't necessarily get trained for residential. I mean, I personally stumbled into residential, as you tend to. My involvement getting into residential was probably started with doing work in the building tribunal as an expert witness, where you get an engineer would do a structural assessment of a problem. The building surveyor would do another assessment. They give you, this is the problem, this is how it should be fixed, and by doing things and itemise things in great detail, you start to develop this different thinking than you do as a quantity surveyor on a commercial job. So doing things in minute detail led me into then being recommended to do estimates on residential projects.
Oh, okay. So therefore, thinking about quantity surveyors in general, I mean, that's an unusual path that you've been down, being expert witness. Not really. I mean, people do it, but not everyone would. You've got to have a certain level of knowledge. So therefore, thinking about quantity surveyors, would many work in residential or not? I mean, if people were to look for a quantity surveyor, they would have to ask about to find one.
They would struggle.
So for a typical renovation or new house project, what stages of the design process does a quantity surveyor provide costing advice?
Normally, I've dealt mostly with architects or owners. The architect most of the architects I've dealt with start me off at concept stage, which is the example I brought you here. And that's more or less for them to get a level of insurance that when they talk to their client, being a renovation project, which I find myself doing more often, they want to give their client a very clear understanding of what the budget's going to be. So obviously the client confers with the architect in detail. The architect gets an overall picture of what they're after. He puts it on, it does an initial concept plan. It comes to me and says, what's it going to cost to do an estimate? Depending upon the way the architect wants to come across to his client, that he's being thorough and he's not going off on square metre rates, which are I hate square metre rates personally, as I mentioned to you before.
Yes.
Unless you've got a good collaborative relationship with an architect and they know what they're thinking and what they're likely to do, and we all then talk about the same level of gross floor area, people get confused what the gross floor area is. So unless you've got that understanding, nobody can give you a fair, true, accurate cost per square metre. So concept stage, very sketchy drawings, sometimes not even a scale on them, but you've got to find out what the scale is. And I take off the quantities as if I was doing a semi-detailed estimate. So it's not broken down in great detail because the detail isn't there to reflect it.
Yep,
but you use your knowledge of what you know should be there.
Yep.
As a quantity surveyor, it's not what's necessarily on the drawing only, it's what you know is going to be there. You know,
from previous work.
You get previous work. And from then on, questions start to develop in my mind. What else hasn't he thought of? So I collaborate with him. He's giving me a very brief indication of what he thinks his client wants, but then I flesh out what he may have thought about but hadn't necessarily committed to paper. So then I build up a cost of probably more reflective of it's not what's on the drawing, it's more what should be on the drawing, even at that preliminary stage, so that the cost is accurately covered.
That concept design stage, it could be hand-drawn or floor plans, as long as they're to scale, everything's to scale, so you can basically scale off it. Is that right?
That's correct. I mean, I can still work off freehand drawings as long as they are drawn approximately to scale. But most architects don't go to that stage. There's a couple of dinosaurs around.
God, I still do freehand concept because it's quick.
I know it's quick.
Would that be like a floor plan, no elevations? Would that work, or would you prefer to have elevations? It's sort of trying to work out that renovate or sell scenario.
A floor plan is the basic.
Yeah.
And then a series of photos.
Yeah. And a rough section maybe, so you know your ceiling heights
Exactly.
and things.
Or even just asking the question, what are we talking about ceiling heights? What are we putting, extending the roof? What's the pitch and all that sort of stuff.
The basic roof form.
It's the basic information.
Yeah.
Have we got trusses? We're going to have a raking ceiling and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Because that has a significant impact.
It does.
As you would know.
Okay, so that's concept design. So then what was the next stage that you would get involved?
The next stage to confirm what was come up with at concept stage is to go to the detailed design stage, where there's a bit of engineering input to make sure that the structural allowances that I may have made are in the correct order, that I've made the right assumptions. I tend to take the liberty of deciding on behalf of the engineer what he's going to need. So I put in a beam, but I don't necessarily. I put in $100 a metre. I know it's going to cost me $100 a metre for a beam to span that distance, because he's taking away the two garage doors and putting in a single garage door. So there's not a great deal of rocket science involved. We're going to have a beam and a couple of columns. So I can take the initiative of that at concept stage, but when you get to the detailed design stage and then engineers get involved, you can then you can fine tune that to a more accurate figure.
Okay, so we started with concept, which was the floor plans, no elevations, but understanding the form of the building. And then we've done more detailed plans, which was floor plans, elevations, etc. And then the final stage, when you've got everything together, do you ever cost at that stage? Because that would be not so much I suppose it's still an estimate, isn't it? But it's more the same at the same stage as a builder would price. If you're working for a builder, though, the builder, he would be potentially using your price as a tender price. Is that right?
Absolutely. And I do quite a few of those on the larger homes, $2 million, $3, $4 million homes. But the other interesting point is that a lot of even small building contractors who do residential don't like doing measuring off drawings. Normally, most of them are still people that are on the tools, and they're on the tools all day, and then they've got to come home to price the next job. And so they're working 16, 17, 18-hour days and measuring up drawings in the dark, at night, and all that with the variety of software packages out there. So there are a number of smaller builders who do rely on quantity surveyors to prepare the basic estimate for them. And it's a true collaboration. You're working with the builder. You're not spending a lot of time on those things where he's going to get a lump sum price for the specialist stuff. Windows is a classic, timber or aluminium windows. There's no point wasting a quantity surveyor's time in figuring out what the cost is, because he can go straight to a supplier and he'll get a supply cost. That's when I approach things differently, because a builder normally approaches things from how much labour am I going to have on site. I'm going to take 40 weeks. I'm going to have two carpenters. I'm going to have a junior, etc. So you then spend most of the time sourcing material costs only for the carpentry side of the home. When it comes to concrete and all those things, that's a fairly fixed approach. It doesn't matter whether it's commercial or residential. Concrete supplied at a rate, it's laid at a rate, reinforcement supplied at a rate, etc., etc. But the carpentry side, all the linings and that sort of stuff, it tends to work out the material costs, and you normally get that from a builder basis. They don't try and tell them what the price of a piece of timber is. Each one has their own buying power.
That's right. They all have their own suppliers that they go to, don't they?
And buying power. The price that your builder A might get something for, and builder B, it could be totally different.
Oh, how interesting.
It's not the same. It's not the same at all. So you've got to be careful about, is it mechanically graded pine class 10, 12 or 15? And sometimes you've got to nut that out. Sometimes it's not clear. And you're going to make sure that the builder gets you the rate that he can buy it for, not me telling him what it's worth to buy. And so you work out all the material costs, and then in the collaboration again, you work out that you're going to have two senior carpenters, and
who's on their team?
Who's on the team, and you price that in as a lump sum of labour, a labour lump sum, excluding things like specialist things like plasterboard. A lot of carpenters, a lot of builders tend to fix their own plasterboard, and then they get somebody in to set it and finish it. They separate some of those costs in Queensland, I might add, not in most other places. So you tend to, those things can become priced as a labour and material cost. But the carpentry side, the stud work, the bracing and all that sort of things that you and I both know have to go into a project are done by the builder's carpenters. And those things, you just got to work out the material cost and make sure you've covered all your material costs accurately. And then the labour cost is something you stand back and you talk it. I talk it through. Yeah, 2 guys, 3 guys for 30 weeks, 40 weeks. This guy will be here for 4 weeks after that, etc.
Oh, that's interesting. So I understand now how that's different. And that is interesting because I remember talking to a builder about a particular job, because I know these days a lot of builders won't tender. There's just work around, and so so often you could be going into a job with just one builder. And so I suppose that's why I was interested about how could a person get peace of mind if they've just got one builder. They want to know that they're paying market rate, and they also want to get some education about what they're actually getting, because some builders will give you a very comprehensive breakdown, but often some will almost give you a bottom line, and it's like, it's a bottom line of $2 million. Like, what's in there? What's not in there? Like, how do I know? So it is very much about education, isn't it, that you would get that price.
Yep.
Oh, but where I was going to with that was, I remember talking to this builder, and I said to him, well, he said he wouldn't tender, so I said, that's fine. I said, can I get on behalf of my client, can I get an estimate for that as well? And he said, yes, but I want you to use my estimator, my quantity surveyor. And I didn't really understand why that was, but now you're telling me that's because whoever he was using as a cost estimate, as a quantity surveyor estimator, would have been getting using, all that knowledge, that the way that he prices.
Yes.
So that sort of makes sense, doesn't it? Because I didn't understand that, but it does make sense. Because if I went off to someone else and got a separate estimate of the job, it would have been different.
You'll never be able to compare 2 builders' estimates. One, as you say, one will give you a bottom line, and the other will give you a breakup. The other breakup, no rates, no prices, just a series of quantities and the bottom line.
Yes.
So that's how you know what's in the job.
Yeah, I know when I call prices in and they all come back, and it's just
a nightmare.
Yeah, it's a nightmare, and you're sort of trying to read between the lines, and just, as you're saying, experience of what you're expecting and looking for variations, and then asking them what they've grouped this with that, or different things have been put together in different ways. So and talking about that then, is there any way to get around that? Because the cost estimator in the previous interview, he said if you could possibly get the estimate first and get the builder to price along the same lines as the estimate if you were doing one. But that won't necessarily work, because I certainly know, talking to builders, that they say they put their jobs together in a certain way, and that's what they always have done. They're not going to change it because their head wouldn't work to make sure everything's in there.
That's
Everyone
right.
sort of has to do it the way they do it. Because it's such a lot of money, and it's, all goes pear-shaped if they've missed things.
Correct.
So I don't know what you do. So what was the outcome there?
I can't give you an answer on that one. I do my things elementally because it's a sanity check. I know that if I do a strip footing, have an excavation, the concrete, the Rio, and I know it's a checklist. I've covered that.
That's right.
Whereas a builder will go, a lot of builders don't like pricing. They hate it.
Oh no, they hate it. Yeah, no, I get it. And it's not their gig. It's fine, but it's like, how do you balance it all? I don't know. It's the mystery of all time, though. Yeah. Okay. No worries. I can't give you an insight. There's just no way to deal with that, is there? Like, I get why that builder that said get it from my estimator to put it together. I can understand that now. Suddenly, after all these years, I was like, was that a really shady thing to say? But now, when you say that, it's because of his suppliers. Yeah. I totally didn't get that. So other than getting a builder and using his, but sometimes builders would put their own prices together, so they wouldn't even be able to say, use the estimator or quantity surveyor that I use. I don't know. Okay. We've just left people hanging there, and they'll just have to stay that way. So how do you, when you're putting an estimate together, where do the materials and labour prices come from? You've touched on that a little bit when you were talking about putting together the builder's price at the tender stage, when you were working for a builder to enable he would be using your price, and you were getting the rates from him. When you're potentially putting those other estimates together, which was the concept stage one and the more developed design stage one, Where are those figures coming from?
I normally rely on contacts that I have in the building industry. I do rely on builders, and I keep in touch with a number of builders, particularly when it comes to odd products that I haven't come across before, and to make sure that the figure that I put into the estimate reflects approximately what it should be.
Mm. So I know with most jobs, often people will think of using a builder to get cost advice for smaller jobs through to larger jobs. And what do you see as the benefits of obtaining independent cost advice from a quantity surveyor?
Well, a quantity surveyor would have no vested interest in the project, whether he's going to get it or not. I would tend to suspect that builders will try and to win a job, produce a favourable price. I don't approach it as a favourable price. It's got to be an accurate price to make sure that it's reflective of all the changes occurring in the industry at any particular time.
So can a quantity surveyor give advice for the whole of Australia, or are they more locally based?
I've found there's a great variation. I've done work in Sydney and Melbourne on commercial projects, and that's been an education to find out how things are done so differently down south. And there's no way in the world that you could price anything in another state without being embedded in there for a while or picking a lot of brains for over a period of time. You will not get the answer right. It's just not possible.
Thank you so much, Flav, for all of your incredible information today. That's been really informative.
My pleasure.
Wow, what a fantastic interview. We covered so much information. To conclude, I just want to draw your attention again to 3 really important points from today. The first was that quantity surveyors and cost estimators come from different backgrounds, but when it comes to residential, they work in very similar ways. Either one can provide the cost education that you need, you just have to find someone local. Although I didn't cover it in this episode, the costs for a quantity surveyor's services are very similar to those of a cost estimator, and I covered a cost estimator's services and their costs in the previous episode. The second point was about the absolute importance of getting your design ideas costed early in the design phase to make sure that your brief and your budget are aligned before you go too far. Ideally, this should happen at 2 stages. First, at the concept stage, when you've just got rough floor plans to work out if your project is even feasible. Again, the second stage, if you proceed that far, is at the detailed design stage, where you've got floor plans, you've got elevations, you've got a bit more information, but you haven't gone to town planning and you haven't gone as far as getting full engineering. You may have partial engineering if you need that information based on your design. This is so important. I just can't stress this enough. The third very interesting point is that both cost estimators and quantity surveyors provide costings for builders at tender stage. It's important to note that all builders will have their own suppliers, which will lead to a different final cost outcome. In the next episode, you'll find out all about square metre rates. I find out what they are, how they're calculated, and why building cost professionals really don't like talking about them. I'll be talking again to quantity surveyor Flavio Costanzo. Thanks for listening to Renovation Collaborative. Sign up for the weekly wrap newsletter and get the concise podcast summary delivered straight to your inbox. Also, find the full transcript PDF edited into clear Q&A on the Renovation Collaborative website, renovationcollaborative.com.au.